barely any information, oddly sanguine, has more melee capabilities than Mikaela. In today's episode, we're going to be talking about Cyratin, Calamity, Benimaru. Now, that just might be the stupidest intro I've ever done for this. There is not a lot of information about Benimaru. That's not to say there isn't a lot of lore around him, but the thing I've been trying to do recently is do lore based around the current era for that character. So Benimaru has a lot of lore, but a lot of it comes to light after the Ruin War. The fact of the matter is that Benimaru isn't really prevalent before the Ruin War. In fact, he only arrived a few hundred years before the Ruin War itself actually started to kick off. As a result, the Cyratin Empire doesn't really have a lot of experience or exposure to Benimaru. As a result, they don't really know a whole hell of a lot. What they do know is that this guy quite literally came out of nowhere. The fact of the matter is that Benimaru didn't exist in the Cyratin Empire's registry prior to him suddenly becoming one of the Cyratin Calamities. Keep in mind that this was during the time right when the natural disasters were dissolved, the 10 great natural disasters were dissolved, and the Cyratin Calamities were really starting to come into play, and they were first being created. At this point, there were not 8 Cyratin Calamities. That being said, Benimaru just kind of came out of nowhere. Like I said, he didn't exist. Nobody knew him. Every single person that is prominent within the Cyratin Empire at this time, everybody to a certain degree is aware of them. Everybody in the Cyratin Empire knows who Mikaela and Duran are. Everybody knows who Alex Jackson is, the Imperial Prince. Everybody knows who Molly is. She's the Cyratin Empress. Mikaela and Duran are two of the most powerful beings within the Cyratin Empire. Whilst he's not technically a Calamity yet, everybody knows Raymond Ulcia because he's the second most wanted man in the Cyratin Empire. You know? Everybody, well, most everybody is aware of the captain of the Cyratin Royal Vanguard, Alexander, which is an individual we're going to be doing his deep dive actually during the Ruin War itself, so that should be fairly fun. You know, everybody to a certain degree knows these individuals, and whilst they may not know incredibly important or in-depth details about these individuals, they more or less know them. You would be hard-pressed to go to any corner of the Cyratin Empire and not have people who know about Alex, who know about Molly, who know about Mikaela, Duran. Like I said, give or take with Alexander. Same with Isaiah. Everybody knows Isaiah. He's the Cyratin strategist, you know. But Benimaru came out of nowhere. Nobody knew who he was. There was no information on who this guy was. He was appointed by the Cyratin Emperor, the legendary Jackson, as one of the newest Cyratin Calamities. And keep in mind that the Cyratin Empire wasn't really aware of what the Cyratin Calamities really were. The fact of the matter is that the 10 natural disasters was dissolved, and in its place was now the Natural Disasters Corps. A lot of people just assumed, okay, this just must be rebranding. But then, all of a sudden, everybody started hearing word of these Cyratin Calamities. Who the hell are these guys, and how do they differ from the natural disasters? Well, it took a long time, but eventually the information started getting down to pretty much everybody. The Natural Disasters Corps was the product of the Natural Disasters Program, essentially taking your common Joe who has access to magic and putting them on the level of the 10 natural disasters. At this point, you now have basically a small army of mages that can be deployed pretty much wherever the Cyratin Empire needs them. Many of these mages oftentimes being in officer positions. That way they can give out orders. They're individuals who clearly know what they're doing as they have incredible amounts of magic. They go to officer training school, all this different stuff. They're quite literally military officers. Now, the majority of the time, they don't actually serve as officers, but almost each and every single one of them has that ability. And then you have the Calamities, and everybody was just kind of confused. Eventually, it got down the line that the Calamities was the old natural disasters. They were given a new name, And basically, it was more of an honorific than anything else. They were starting to get to the point where just calling them a natural disaster at this point just was honestly starting to get borderline insulting, especially if we're talking about the big three. These being Rex, Duran, and Mikaela. Now, at this point, Rex has mysteriously disappeared. Nobody, and I mean nobody in the Cyratin Empire has any clue where the hell he's gone. Which is a huge, huge problem. The guy is completely and utterly insane, is an adrenaline junkie that will do anything and everything he possibly can just to get into a fight. And he can beat, single-handedly, the strongest person in the Cyratin Empire at this time, which is the Emperor Zach Jackson. Like, Rex is insanely powerful, and he's just mysteriously gone. Like, normally, they literally have... I forget exactly what the lore was for Rex, all of it, but I believe they have, like, a kill switch, not attached to his body, because his body can just instantly regenerate, but it's like a kill switch on his soul to make sure that this dude doesn't go on a rampage. He's constantly on a 24/7 watch, and if he ever gets out of line, basically Legend, Duran, and Mikaela all team up on him just to get him to the point where he's satisfied and decides, I'm not going to go on a bloody rampage anymore. Like, he is a huge problem, but he's the ultimate trump card, because he can literally just be doled out to any situation, and it's gone. Like, it's what Rex is at that time, what future Duran is. So, like, in the future, after the Ruin War, Duran gets a huge power-up. It's a little bit of a spoiler, but I guess not that much. He gets a humongous power-up, and it takes a very long time, but he essentially becomes the solution to any problem. Like, hey, you see this problem that we literally cannot handle in any other way? I'm going to throw you at it, and you're going to make sure it never sees the light of day again. And Duran goes there, and that's exactly what he does. You know, Duran in the future is what Rex is now. The ultimate solution to any problem. It's essentially like Warhammer 40k and being far more willing to use Exterminatus. That's what these guys are. It's total and utter extermination. Oftentimes, bare minimum planetary scale, usually solar system scale, if not higher. It honestly depends on their opinion, or their mood, rather. But, of course, that's not why we're here. We're not here to talk about Rex. We're not here to talk about Duran. We're here to talk about Benimaru. Benimaru is, as I've been alluding to, is a really interesting and weird individual. Came out of nowhere, and one of the most obvious things about Benimaru, aside from his apparel, is his almost permanent sanguine personality. You know, everybody within the Cyratin Empire, save for a few choice individuals, they're very stoic, they're very glum, you know, they're kind of always annoyed about everything, you know, basically think the personality of grim dark. You know, that's kind of everybody's personality. And then you got Benimaru off in the corner, who just always seems to be in a good mood. Like, beyond just having, in general, a good mood. Like, straight out, he's just sanguine off in the corner. Just always, like, having a face of, like, enlightenment, almost. And it makes interacting with him interesting, because he's almost the dictionary definition of an optimist without being one. The fact of the matter is that Benimaru has this really weird characteristic where he says things in a very optimistic and chipper way, like he's very happy about it, but he's incredibly pessimistic. You know, he's always looking at the downsides, but he always says it in such a way that it's like, you listen to him being pessimistic about something, and you automatically, your brain gets tricked into thinking that he's saying something optimistic, and you're like, oh, that's great. And then you think about it, it's like, oh, that's not great. Why did I agree to that? And it's utterly bizarre. Now, for his species, nobody really knows. He's not human, he's not Cyratin, he's not Yvetan. Well, there go our three human-like species. Nobody's really sure what he is. He looks like a human. Actually, he looks more like he looks like a human that is the size of a Cyratin, but nobody's really sure what he is. They've done DNA tests and all kinds of different stuff. Every single time it's inconclusive. He is his own species, as far as anybody can tell. Now, the only other thing, in my opinion, other than maybe his magic, that is truly unique about Benimaru is the way that he dresses. It's very... It has a strong Asian vibe, because a lot of the clothes are Asian in origin, but he also has this, like, almost mystical look to him, which is a bit odd to say simply because, well, you can't say mystical, magic exists. Well, yeah, but you'll see why here in a minute. So, Benimaru is iconic for having pure snow white hair. I'm talking like as white as freshly fallen snow white. Purest white hair. And it's usually in a ponytail, sometimes it's in a knot at the back of his head, and it usually drapes down roughly about to the middle of his back. He wears, I can't remember the proper term. I think there's a proper term, but it's basically the male variant of a kimono. I can't for life of me right this second remember the actual name. It might just be called male kimono, I don't know. But it's a male kimono, once again, pure white, snow purest white, with a black sash around the belt. Most notably is the fact that Benimaru is almost always seen with his right arm out of the sleeve and kind of just cradled with half of his forearm exposed and the rest of his arm inside of that kimono, kind of just hanging limply on where the kimono meets the sash, just kind of hanging there limply. Always iconically being seen wearing it that way. Perhaps the most interesting detail about him is the fact that he has a big ass scarf. But this scarf, not only is it blood red, which is already kind of disconcerting as it is, it flows around him and behind him, obviously wrapped around his neck at all times. But the most interesting thing is that the fact that the scarf itself never seems to actually touch Benimaru. It's floating, free floating, and appears to almost be like anchored to the specific distance away from his body. Like a very specific location. It always seems to be there no matter how heated the battle is, no matter how much he's moving, no matter how fast he's moving. It maintains its place at all times. And the scarf itself, waving in the wind, it doesn't respond to normal airflow. Like, the Eldar from 40k have something fairly similar to this. What was it called? Void Silk, I believe, or something like that. How it can literally be trapped in, like, a Necron's Tesseract Labyrinth, or Tesseract, whatever the fuck it's called. I'm pulling a blank right here, which is odd, because I'm a huge Necron fan. But basically the stasis cubes that they have, and the silk will still be flowing in the wind, even though there's literally no airflow. It's very similar to that. Benimaru could literally be running at near light speed, and the scarf will just be lazily flapping behind him. Not actually, like, flapping like you would assume something moving at that speed would, which technically at that speed it would just be disintegrated because it is far beyond what his physical capabilities are capable of handling, but that's aside from the point. Once again, another interesting thing about his attire is the fact that there appears to be blue motes of flame all around him, suspended in the air with seemingly no fuel source, and Benimaru doesn't really seem to be aware of these. He's obviously aware that they exist, but he never seems to actually be like, you know, I need to make sure that I don't touch this, or I need to make sure that something doesn't touch these. The fact of the matter is that the flames themselves emit no heat, they do not appear to emit any light, and most interestingly of all is the fact that you can outright touch them with any part of your body, usually your hands, but you can touch them with any part of your body and they won't burn you either. It's almost like it's a hologram, but they're actually there. It's not actually a hologram. And you can even wave your hand through them and it'll move around like a normal flame, but it almost immediately returns back to its original flame shape when nothing is interfering with it. Utterly bizarre. Nobody's really sure what these are. Benimaru seems to understand what they are, but doesn't really like talking about it. So that's a bit of an odd thing. The final detail is this, and I actually have to quickly, as fast as I can, look up the proper term for one of these. So, Benimaru has 2 weapons on him at all times. These 2 weapons are a pair of blades. The first blade is a katana. Now, this katana is kitted out. This is a Cyratin high-tech katana. It is mono-edged. It is capable of creating a force field around it, similar to, it's not identical. It's a very rough description, but it's similar to force blades and stuff from 40K. You know, it's got that similar kind of vibe, but it's not exactly correct. But so, this blade is the one that Benimaru primarily uses. Whenever he's in combat, he draws this blade and always uses it. Now, he has a second blade, and I am probably going to butcher the hell out of this because I've never actually heard the way that this is said, but it's basically a longer version of a katana, which I believe is pronounced odachi. I could be wrong. I've never heard it said, so don't get into the comments and start screaming at me, oh, you said it wrong. I'm aware I probably said it wrong, but regardless of that fact, this longer blade is utterly bizarre. Benimaru has it on him at all times. There are times where he's seen without the katana, but he is always seen with this longer blade, and he has only ever drawn it twice. Both times after one during the Ruin War, one time after the Ruin War. And it almost seems like the last resort after his last resort. You know, this is the thing that he will use at the very, very end of any possibilities. He seems incredibly reluctant to even touch the blade, let alone draw the blade. And we'll get into it in just a little bit. But it's weird because he obviously is a fantastic swordsman. The fact of the matter is that Benimaru doesn't have a trait. That's an important thing to know. Benimaru does not have a trait. He does not have access to anything like that. But bizarrely enough, he's not only capable of going toe-to-toe with Mikaela, who has the Blade Master trait, which naturally makes him beyond prodigy with bladed weapons, but he's even capable of beating Mikaela with bladed weapons. And this is just purely off of skill alone. Now, I should say this. Mikaela is exceptionally skilled. The fact of the matter is that even specialized traits like Blade Master, like Sage and stuff like that, they definitely give you a boost. They give you an advantage. But a lot of times it comes down to pure skill and knowledge. It can only do so much. Typically, only the absolute most powerful traits, which I guess technically Sage is one of those, are capable of more or less holding your hand, I guess is a good way to say it. You know, the trait is doing the major work. Now with Molly, she has gone so far beyond her trait. She has learned so many different types of magic. She's constantly exploring and finding new things despite how long she has lived. And this is largely due to the fact that after their discovery of primordial magic, there's literally infinite possibilities. But again, we're getting off topic. The fact of the matter is that specialized traits usually are only capable of going so far. After that, it's more of it's like a buff in a video game. You know, let's say you get a buff that makes you do 10% more damage if you're a damage dealer. That's great. You're now doing 10% more damage. It's helping a lot, usually, especially if you're min-maxing, every percent counts. But anyway, it's helping. It's increasing your overall damage by 10%. That's a fairly good amount. But the fact of the matter is that you're not necessarily relying. You're not purely dependent on that buff. You're not purely dependent on the trait. And that's an important thing to know. The majority of what Mikaela is capable of doing is basically just throwing out random numbers just so you get a general idea. You know, it'd be like the trait is helping for 20%, you know? And then the remaining 80%, 60% of it is just pure skill. The final 20%, wait, that's not right. 20, 40, 80. No, I said 60%. Yeah. 60, 70, 80. Yeah, okay. Quick mental math. So 20% of that would be the trait itself. Another 20% would be coming from Mikaela's magic, because he obviously has blade magic, which helps out tremendously. But the remaining 60% is just pure skill. It's what Mikaela has managed to learn. He's learned basically every single way to use every single blade. Now, again, a lot of understanding how to use that blade does come from Blade Master, but he's not purely reliant on the way that Blade Master has shown him how to do it. Because it's like, think about it this way. I don't know any specific bladed weapons, because I'm not particularly into bladed weapons, at least in real life, but I would imagine that there are bladed weapons out there, that there are multiple different ways of using them. Blade Master will show you the most optimal way of using this. So basically, like, again, to kind of throw out a video game term, let's say that you have a specific stance, and there are multiple stances for, let's say, you're using a broadsword. You know, there are multiple different ways, multiple different stances that you can use a broadsword in. And Blade Master will show you the most optimal one, you know? It's not necessarily the one that's going to do the most amount of damage, but it's the one that is going to be able to do good damage and keep you alive, you know? And it only shows you that one stance. So let's say, again, you're using a broadsword, and let's say, throw out a random number, let's say it has six different stances, six different ways that you can use this broadsword, and each one has a different purpose, you know? One is pure offense, one is pure defense, one is a good mixture of them, one is, you know, slightly more towards offense but has defense, one is slightly more towards defense but still has offense, one is, you know, you get the idea. And Blade Master will pick the one that is the most optimal. Usually it'll be the one that is, you know, it has a lot of offense, but it also has that little bit of defense that's just there to help you, you know. But it's obviously not going to be the best, especially depending on the individual's preference and what they're just naturally good at. So Mikaela has to learn the rest of those 5 stances. And that's kind of what I'm getting at, is that Blade Master gives him a massive boon. More than people probably realize, but a lot of it is just down to pure skill and understanding of how to use that bladed weapon, or how to use a bladed weapon in general. And that just really drives it home further at the fact that Benimaru is capable of going toe-to-toe with Mikaela and outright winning in a bladed weapon fight, which Mikaela already has the edge in because of Blade Master. And it really started to get the Cyratin Empire talking, like, who is this guy? How is he so damn good with that katana, to the point where no matter what bladed weapon Mikaela is using, he just can't win, you know? Because unless Benimaru has given him the victory, Mikaela has never actually won in a battle that both of them are serious in. Mikaela has lost every single time Benimaru was serious. And it's... how do I want to explain it? It's like, the only person that Benimaru hasn't beaten in just straight up blade fights, you know, fighting with the sword, the only person he hasn't been able to beat is Legend. And that's when both of them were trying. And this isn't down to, oh, Legend has access to divine abilities, or, oh, Legend has a blade that is capable of extending. It's a whip blade, or anything like that. Oh, Benimaru has superior magic. It's just down to pure stance and technique and skill alone, because Legend works with his own purely unique form, or his purely unique stance when it comes to his whip blade. And that stance is quite literally just chaos. It's completely unpredictable. He does things that make no sense, like an attack is literally coming in, and if this attack lands, it could do serious damage to Legend, and he'll go in for just a bull rush attack, or he'll just kind of almost take it to... It's difficult to explain because it's literally just complete randomness. It's complete chaos. He doesn't follow a rhyme or rhythm, More or less, when it comes to any stance or any style or anything, there's usually a rhyme or rhythm. There is order. There is a specific sequence of events, And you can see this in almost everything in the real world. And then there's Legend's stance when it comes to using his blade, and it's just complete and utter chaos. There's no rhyme, there's no reason, there's no rhythm. There's no sequence that can be followed because it's just pure fucking anarchy. And it's impossible to keep up with him. But you compare that to Benimaru, especially when you're comparing him to Michaela, and it's almost just pure blinding speed. Like, out of all of the calamities that we currently have and all the calamities we have in the future, Benimaru is by far the fastest, Like, there are 3 different measurements, and this comes down to something that we had talked about, or maybe we didn't talk about, a long time ago, and it's basically the way an individual fights. Actually, I'm almost certain we talked about this in the Divine Weapon episode. I forget the exact terminology I use, but it's basically the specific way an individual fights. They're either focused on agility, they're focused on mysticism, which is usually magic or divine capabilities or even psionics, or they're focused on physical strength, And everybody, whether they realize it or not, they are following one of these 3 core tenets. Now, technically, there is a 4th one. It is known as obliteration, which is a combination of all 3, and it's exceedingly difficult to do. The fact of the matter is that even the supreme gods aren't capable of doing it. The only one who can is Legend himself, and he's the one who made the obliteration style, or the way to fight that way. But by and large, everybody fights a different way, Agility is ideal when fighting against people who are focused on strength. Strength is ideal for individuals who are fighting with mysticism, and mysticism is ideal for people who are fighting against agility. It's a trifecta. And the reasoning for this is because, more or less, if you have agility, you're going to overwhelm somebody who's using pure strength. If you're using pure strength, you can usually brute force your way through spells. And if you're fighting against somebody who has pure agility and you're using magic, the majority of spells usually are capable of keeping up with agility. Unless you're using some big grandiose spell that takes a long time to fire or takes a long time to move, by and large, the majority of spells are fast. And I mean that they move fast. So as a result, all of them counter one another. Unless you're Benimaru. Benimaru's agility is on a whole nother level, Benimaru fights with agility. Duran fights with mysticism. Both of them are the extremes. Yandro fights with strength. He is the extreme, And then you have the other ones. Michaela, he's obviously mysticism. Raymond, he's obviously mysticism. Alex is obviously strength. And then there's the other 2, which is Baylor and Faust, who we haven't gotten to. Baylor and Faust, Baylor is mysticism once again, and Faust is agility. But regardless, when it comes to pure agility, Benimaru is the best. When it comes to pure strength, you can't beat Yandro. And when it comes to pure mysticism, Duran will overwhelm you every single time. And the reason why I'm getting at this is because Benimaru is simultaneously considered to be one of the weakest Cyratin calamities, which is still saying a lot. He's still a calamity. You know, when the calamities are first assembled, they're on the level of omnis. And just as a reminder of how the order of gods go, you have mortal beings, you have demigods, you have lesser gods, greater gods, lesser onin, greater onin, and then you have omnis, deities, and then the supreme gods themselves. So they're pretty fucking powerful at this point. You know, the old 10 great natural disasters, before they got some of their power boosts and were finally at the level where I was like, yeah, we should probably call themselves something else. They were largely on the level of greater gods, and they had a massive spike in overall power, which took them all the way to Omni. They are incredibly powerful people that oftentimes it's exceptionally difficult to find individuals that can go toe-to-toe with these guys because they're that powerful. Benimaru is considered to be one of the weakest out of all calamities. He's tied with Faust. Typically, when it comes to the calamities, everybody agrees that it's either Benimaru or Faust who is the weakest in overall combat capabilities. But the fact of the matter is that Benimaru has such insane agility, especially when compared to Faust, that not only is he one of the weakest, but he's also one of the strongest, and it's purely dependent on just how serious he is. If he's not really taking things seriously, or if he's just, you know, kind of somewhat blasé about the situation, you know, he knows he can handle it, but he's not really going to give it his all. He's one of the weakest calamities, which is usually what he is 95% of the time. But every once in a blue moon, Benimaru gets really serious, you know, where it's like he's taking no names. He will not remember who you are. He is not taking any names. He is just going to fuck shit up. And this is the point in which Benimaru almost gets on the level of one of the most powerful calamities. And it takes a lot to get Benimaru to this point. And part of it has to do with that second blade he refuses to touch. So, without further ado, let's get into that mysterious blade. Now, I believe it was the episode that we went over the Dark Lord Zera. We had talked about that Zera had made 6 cursed blades of Zera. And they're basically the direct opposite, the direct antithesis of divine weapons. They are balls to the walls overpowered, even when compared to first generation divine weapons. Each of them has a unique little quirk, a thing that they're really good at and typically can overwhelm just about damn near anybody that is unfortunate to have to fight against them. Now, we know the names of 2 of them. The first is just outright called Calamity, and it is wielded by Zera himself, or at least it would be if Zera had access to it. And there's an ancient prophecy on it. This prophecy, despite the fact it was made by Zera, or the cursed blade Calamity was created by Zera, the prophecy itself wasn't created by Zera. It's a little bit confusing. Nobody's really sure who made the prophecy. It certainly wasn't Zera. It certainly wasn't the Dark Lord, or the Dark God in control of Zera. But basically, when Zera finally gives up, when he finally accepts that the way that he wants to do things will not work, and he abandons everything, absolutely abandons everything, he will then have access to Calamity, and Calamity will quite literally cause calamity. It's basically, this is an game over scenario. And when it comes to Shattered Legacies, there are only 3 situations in which if this ever happens, it's game over for everybody. It's not just game over for the Cyratin Empire. It's not just game over for all of mortals. It's game over for everybody. There is no restart. There is no respawn. There is no resume. If this ever happens, it's over. There is no recovering from it. Every single mortal, every single god, every single being is gone. And the cursed blade Calamity is one of them. The other 2 are wielded by 2 of the Infinity Dragons. The first one is the Infinity Dragon of Destruction and Desolation, known as Vega. And this is known as the Black Winds. The Black Winds is just like Calamity. If Vega ever uses the Black Winds, it's game over. There is not a damn thing that can stop it. And there is nothing that will survive it. It will wipe out everything. Because an important thing to remember is this. Reality isn't a circle. It isn't constantly repeating itself. Reality is a linear line, which this may sound a little strange, It's the end of reality. And what happens here is that a god is in charge of maintaining reality. More or less the current reality, not reality as a whole. This god comes along and creates reality in his image. Whatever his imagination is for however reality should be, he creates it that way. And then it starts from the very first planet ever formed, and it ends at the very last star to finally burn out. And keep in mind that this length of time is then taken to an infinite level, because we're not just talking about a single universe here, we're talking about the entirety of every multiverse, which has infinite number of universes in it. So by the time the very final star in all of reality finally burns out or goes supernova or collapses into a black hole or gravastar or whatever it may be, when that moment happens, a different god will come along, he'll wipe out what remains of reality, and he'll create a brand new reality. And it's not a situation of everything that could have happened has happened, because it's not reality ends and then it just loops back around to the beginning. It's the mortals are gone. Reality itself is gone, but the gods still exist. So the gods remember what has happened and they create something new. It's a linear line. And it keeps on going, god after god, time after time. And this is why certain individuals, such as Alex, such as Legend, such as Molly, such as Duran, such as basically all of the important individuals, this is how they can exist beyond the wiping of reality and continue to find new things for them to be focused on. Each and every single character essentially has a free ticket for immortality to the ends of time itself, whatever that may be, or I guess technically the end of reality as a concept rather than the current reality that they're in, that they have to find obsessions. It's kind of the same problem that the Necrons have. The Necrons, assuming that they don't get destroyed, will literally last until the universe enters its heat death. And they gotta find something to do until then. And, some of them have resorted to conquering the entire galaxy, like Imhotep the Storm Lord. Some of them have decided to be the absolute ultimate shitlord and kleptomaniac, like Trazyn. Others have dedicated their entire eternity towards learning what the hell is it called? Cryptomancy? Is that what? I don't remember if that's the general term, if that's a specific school. But basically you have Orican, who is in chronomancy. Learning the intricacies of how time flows and the various different mysticisms that the Necrons have. Because they have to find something to do. If they don't find something to do, they're going to drive themselves insane. And it's very similar with the bigwigs within the Cyratin Empire and basically anyone within Shadow Legacies that can survive that long. They have to find an obsession. They have to find something that keeps them going. Molly's obsession is simple. Continuing to learn the truly infinite possibilities of magic. No matter how far she goes, she's still finding brand new shit. She's still creating brand new shit. Because the way that they modified magic, it's quite literally infinite. So long as you have the mana requirements and the know-how on how to do something, you can do basically fucking anything. Especially for Molly, because she has the Sage trait. Now, for other people, there's only so much that they can do, because they only have those 6 slots, yada, yada, yada. You get the point. Alex's obsession is equally simple. Alex's obsession is ensuring the well-being of the common man within the Cyratin Empire, or common woman, or however you want to phrase it, the common person within the Cyratin Empire. Making sure they're comfortable, making sure that they have the things that they want, and it's an obsession, honestly, to a more neurotic level than Molly's. Like, he's solely focused on it when he isn't in that little realitorial anchor zone that has the last drop of Legends blood, which technically happens after the Ruin War. You know, Duran's obsession is just proving the fact that he is the strongest time and time again, as well as constantly fiddling and screwing around with his own magic, similar to Isaiah. Constantly refining his magic more and more to the point where, honestly, these guys, because they only have access to their unique magics, their magics are so insanely optimized that they're just capable of casting any number of spells with basically 0 mana requirement because they've optimized it so much. Now, eventually, these two will run out of shit to optimize and create. You know, it's not nearly as infinite as, say, Molly's, but Isaiah is the strategist. He'll have plenty of shit to do, and Duran has no end of people that he can challenge to prove that he is the strongest, because he's also the Sin of Pride. He knows that he's going to win, but he needs to prove it to everybody else, because there's a little bit of insecurity there, as such is the Sin of Pride. But anyway, Benimaru's obsession isn't really that well known. Honestly, I completely forgot why I went on this massive rant. I completely forgot. I went so far into that rant, I can't remember where the hell I left off at. Oh, that's right. We were gonna get to his long blade. I believe is pronounced Odachi. And then somehow I got onto that massive rant. But so, moral of the story for that, yeah. We know the identity of the second cursed blade, and this cursed blade is known as Madra, the Mad Emperor. Now, the unfortunate thing about Madra is the fact that it used to be a divine weapon. That is, until Zera got his hands on it. We don't know what Zera did. We don't know the process by which he did it. We don't know how he modified the divine weapon. But he forced the divine weapon to become completely, utterly, absolutely broken to an insane degree. This is why it is known as the Mad Emperor. Madra is probably one of the most horrific fates, I guess is a great way to put it, that you can find in Shattered Legacies. You know, within 40k, I believe is the, how the hell do you say it? Demunculaba, I believe is how it's said. That fucking atrocious thing in the warp, you know? The Cursed Blade Madra is basically the equivalent of that. Maybe not nearly as ultra grim dark, because holy hell. But, Madra is obviously 2 parts. It's its blade and its scabbard, or its sheath. I don't really know the difference between the two. Regardless, the Cursed Blade itself stays within its scabbard or sheath at all times. I'm just going to call it a sheath. It stays within its sheath at all times. And it should be noted that that is what the second blade at Benimaru's hip is. It is the Cursed Blade Madra, the Mad Emperor. Madra has some really, really weird effects. So long as Benimaru doesn't touch it, the blade remains inert. You are safe to be around it. You can even be directly next to Benimaru, and there will be no ill adverse effect. However, should Benimaru, or anybody really, place their hands on it, there is an instantaneous, near all-encompassing, pure dread and fear. Just by him touching the handle, not even drawing the blade. It's enough to cause even the most battle-hardened veterans who have seen some of the worst shit reality can throw at them to turn into quivering children in the fetal position on the ground. It is truly all-encompassing, like abyssal black dread. This is honestly only the beginning. Like, this is the good fate. Like, if you get hit with this dread, it's basically instant PTSD, just right off the bat as a result of him just touching the damn thing. Which Benimaru is very, very, very careful to make sure nothing touches the blade. In fact, there are times where Benimaru will just all of a sudden, like, it's almost like he phases out of reality and then phases back into reality, just moving ever so slightly. And it's one of those situations where you see it and your brain immediately registers, did I just see that? I'm going crazy. I don't think I just saw that. Did I actually just see that? And what it is this Benimaru literally moving at light speed, taking one step to the side to ensure that nothing touches this blade. Because if anything touches this blade, that dread ripples out like basically like a shockwave from an explosion, just colliding across everybody's psyche. And its range is indeterminate. There are times where it's as little as a couple hundred feet. There are other times where it seemingly affects the entire population of a planet the size of Jupiter. The range appears to be completely and utterly randomized when it comes to this dread. The danger is when Benimaru has the intent of drawing the blade. Now, we're going to start with the first one, and that is him barely drawing the blade. You know, in some of those animes, or even in not animes, how an individual will have like a katana on their hand, and they'll put their hand on the sheath itself, and they'll bend their thumb and put the tip of their thumb onto the guard. And then they'll just they'll extend their thumb, and it ever so slightly draws the blade from its scabbard or sheath. And, you know, it's used as like a form of intimidation, because it's like, this guy will use his sword. Benimaru just has to do that, and the pure pandemonium unleashes. The second the blade in any way, shape, or form is drawn from the sheath, it will immediately fire off a psychic shockwave. And upon hitting anybody at an indeterminate distance, it essentially is like when we covered psionics, the neuroquake ability. Anybody who is hit by this shockwave, which its range seems to be completely and utterly randomized, will instantly go pure frothing at the mouth insane, attacking anything and everything on sight, regardless of whether or not it was friend or foe previously. A lot of times, it'll just outright cause them to fall to the ground, howling in absolute agony as their mind is ripped apart at the seams within nanoseconds. Some people, especially those who are psychic or psionically gifted, will just outright be killed the second that the blade is drawn. The more the blade is drawn from its sheath, the worse these effects become, the larger the radius is, all the way up until the blade is fully drawn, at which point blood red lightning rains down in every single direction as solid walls of electricity. Anything that is struck by this lightning, you would assume would instantly be fried because it's lightning. No, it instead causes micro explosion shock waves of this insanity in every single direction at the point of impact, causing mass, widespread insanity at impossible distances. The lightning itself is capable of being manipulated by the blade and the way that the blade is swung. And anything that it touches when the blade is swung rather than simply just drawn will instantaneously be disintegrated, regardless of the material. This goes all the way up to corrodium and solstite, instantaneously disintegrated on contact. It is a vile weapon that is honestly probably one of the worst, because even if you're not driven insane, you can hear the mad, insane babbling and howling of Madra in the very center of your mind at all times. And this effect is very much permanent, oftentimes causing people to commit suicide just to get it out of their head, because there is no cure. Until the day you die, this overwhelming, impossibly loud screeching of pure insanity can be heard within your mind, basically at like 1 billion decibel. And it's, like I said, enough to drive people to end their lives. It is a weapon that is so dangerous that Benimaru understands how dangerous it is. And the fact of the matter is that everything that I just described is to everybody who isn't touching Madra. The effects for the person who is touching and drawing Madra are like 1,000 times worse. There are only 2 people who have ever survived drawing the blade. These individuals are none other than Benimaru, obviously, and the legendary Jackson. This is due to the fact that Benimaru apparently has gone insane a long time ago, and we know for a fact that Legend is completely insane given just how long he's lived. We don't know why Benimaru is insane, but Legend almost seems immune to the effects. You can still tell there is some wear and tear there on his psyche from using the blade, which he's only ever used it once, and after he got done using it, he threw it back at Benimaru, and he's like, never let me fucking touch that again. I never want to touch that again if you get anywhere near me, so help me by all the gods. And it was incredibly taxing to Legend. And then we have Benimaru, and it's clear that he is in immense pain. Interestingly enough, that permanent screaming in his mind doesn't appear to affect Benimaru when he draws Madra, despite the fact that it very much did affect Legend. However, Legend is so fucking insane at this point that it's basically completely blasé about it. The weapon itself is absolutely atrocious. It is seen as the ultimate war crime and is outlawed by every single faction, whether they be minor or major. Basically everybody, even the gods, voted in on this and were like, Benimaru, you are not allowed to draw that blade. And if you do draw that blade, there better be a damn good reason that you're drawing that blade. Because just like I had said, it affecting the soldiers around him, it doesn't just affect mortals, it affects gods as well. And if that god is within the radius of that damn blade when it's drawn, that god is frothing at the mouth, insane, irrecoverably insane. Like, there is no coming back from that. You are just gone. Anyway, so now we can get to the final part of Benimaru's lore, which I'm realizing there was actually significantly more I could talk about. Some of that due to the massive rant that had no purpose there in the middle. And that is Benimaru's magic. Now, Benimaru very, very rarely uses his magic. He doesn't particularly like it, but he understands that it's basically like a sort of necessary evil type of situation. He doesn't like using it, but he doesn't necessarily hate it. You know, it's just, he would rather use his blade over casting his magic. His magic is known as Crimson Magic, and it's probably one of the most mysterious magics out there. Largely because there's just not a lot of information on it, despite the fact that Benimaru, with Molly, has done extensive research on this magic. For whatever reason, though, this magic appears to be very tight-lipped, and it's very difficult for them to figure out anything about it. Crimson Magic, in of itself, almost seems like this weird pseudo-fire magic, but it's not quite fire magic. It's capable of outputting enormous amounts of heat, but it's not necessarily like I said, fire magic itself. And it's not an evolution of fire magic. It's this utterly bizarre, almost like a pseudo compound magic. I realize that's not the right term for that but it's like halfway to being a unique magic. Like, it's absurdly difficult for anybody but Benimaru to use. Benimaru can use it basically as easily as if he just breathes. It's that easy for him. But whilst Molly is capable of using Crimson magic, it requires ungodly levels of focus on her part. It is so hard for anybody else to use it, which is why it's been given the moniker of pseudo-unique. Because it's so difficult to use it, it might as well just be a unique type of magic. Like, Benimaru is honestly going to be the only person who can ever actually use this magic. The magic itself has utterly bizarre magical physics. It has aspects of earth magic, it has aspects of gravity magic, it has aspects of fire magic. It even has utterly bizarre aspects of ice magic and even similarities to Duran's molten magic. It's almost like somebody just took a bunch of different types of magic and just threw them in a pot, stirred the pot for like 30 minutes, and was like, here you go, here's your new magic. Like, it's half-baked at best. And there's a lot of different abilities that he can use. Not a lot of them have names, largely due to the fact that, again, Benimaru is the first person to have ever been able to use Crimson magic, and as a result, he doesn't really have any names for any of the spells. You know, it's more of just like, he's basically forcing himself to use silent spellcasting because he hasn't thought of a name for these different spells. That being said, he does have one ability in specific that does have a name. Now, when we had talked about Isaiah's episode, we had talked about how Isaiah and one other person damn near killed Duran. Duran was taking Isaiah's fight seriously, and for whatever reason lowered his defenses. The other person was Benimaru, and that's because Duran, in no way, shape, or form, was taking the fight seriously. Benimaru and Duran ended up fighting, for whatever reason, and Duran was not taking it seriously at all. His defenses were down almost the entire time. He was narrowly fending off every single attack, whilst feigning complete and utter confidence, as is the cost of the sin of pride. And, you know, you could argue that it was the level of pride of pure arrogance, because he was like, there's no way this guy can do anything that can harm me. I've already seen some of his most powerful spells. They've barely done anything. I'm capable of, granted, just barely, but I'm capable of deflecting every single sword slash that he does towards me. This guy can't do anything. And Benimaru decided to call his bluff. He utilized an ability simply known as the Crimson Harvest. We don't know what the Crimson Harvest is. We don't know what it does. Duran is very obviously not willing to talk about it, considering it, again, damn near killed him. And Benimaru seemingly does not want to talk about his magic to anybody other than Molly. Now, it's theorized that Molly has some basic understanding of how the magic works, but again, we don't really know. His magic isn't really publicized. Not a lot of people talk about it. In fact, the High Council of Mages aren't even aware that it really exists. They're aware that it exists, but they aren't aware that the Crimson Harvest exists. All that we know is the very few details that Duran has ended up spilling along the way. The first detail was that it's a palm strike. The second detail is that it outputs an impossible level of kinetic force and heat. The third detail is that it damn near ruptured his back outwards. We have no other information other than that. And it's really interesting because we need to remember who this was being used on. This is being used on Duran. Duran has molten magic, as well as the trait Thermo Spike. Now, an unintended side effect of Thermo Spike that we've never really talked about is the fact that Duran is basically immune to fire and heat. You know, like, the dude literally can put molten material on his body that, granted, is from his magic, and it won't affect him. There might be a little bit of singeing of his arm hair, but that's about it. Fire has no effect, and his heat tolerance is so absurdly high that the dude can literally make temperatures that go beyond what supernovas are capable of producing, and just chilling in there like it's just a warm tropical breeze, you know? Like, it's not hot at all. So the fact that this thermal palm strike, which granted had an immense amount of force behind it, but that this thermal palm strike was capable of affecting him, and not only affecting him, but almost killing him, it really says a lot. And again, we really don't have a lot of information. When it comes to Benimaru's overall responsibilities, it's fairly simple. You know, Duran, when you're using Duran, or rather, when you're using Duran's powers, you see that problem over there? I don't. Go make sure it's not a problem anymore. And he goes and he makes sure it's not a problem anymore. Mikhaila's purpose is very simple. He's protecting the Cyratin Emperor. Not that Legend needs protecting, but Mikhaila is there anyway, and this is largely due to the fact that the two are already good friends and hang out with each other anyway, so he might as well just act the part of a bodyguard. Again, even though the person that you're bodyguarding is literally somebody who is invulnerable to all forms of damage, but regardless. Benimaru's purpose is basically similar to Mikhaila, just being a bodyguard and dealing with any single individual threat. The interesting thing about the Calamities, especially when we get to all 8 of them, is that it's almost perfectly split down the middle between utter destructive carnage and solely focus on 1v1ing somebody. You know, you have Duran, you have Mikhaila, you have Raymond, and you have Baylor. These 4 individuals are just absolute mass destruction carnage. Then you have Alex, you have Faust, you have Yandril, and you have Benimaru, who really shine when it's a 1v1, use everything that you've got, but they don't really have, like, mass destruction capabilities. And that's not to say that they couldn't use abilities that have mass destruction, but they typically don't, for one reason or another. They're specifically tailored towards dealing with a single opponent, which it should be noted that Yandril's purpose is quite literally dealing with problematic gods. That's his job. Like, the Cyratin Empire comes across a god, and they're being a particular pain in the ass. Yandril, go get him. And Yandril goes get him. So, but Benimaru's primary purpose is usually standing as a bodyguard, and we're definitely going to hear about that during the Ruin War, and it's really only at the very tail end of the Siege of Ostengrad that Benimaru actually gets involved, largely because he's spending the majority of his time protecting the Cyratin strategist Isaiah and the Cyratin Empress Molly within the Central Command Nexus. But of course, I don't want to give any spoilers for that because there is a lot of information. So, to wrap up this episode, I'm going to give you a little bit of information on how exactly the Ruin War is going to work, because that is the next thing. We've reached the final topic. It's time to finally get to the Ruin War. So, the next episode, maybe 2 episodes, is going to be talking about the Prelude. And this is basically all of the events that lead up to the Siege of Ostengrad itself. Probably going to be 2, maybe 3 episodes, maybe 1 if I can really condense it, but I'm not really going to try. And this will be in our standard format, you know. I'm going to be giving you a lot of information, you guys are going to be absorbing it, and we're going to very slowly, or very quickly, depending on how it goes, get to the point where we're talking about the Siege of Ostengrad proper. During the Siege of Ostengrad, however, I'm going to be taking a complete 180. I'm not going to be giving you guys details and lore. I'm going to turn this into a story. Now, I want to preface this ahead of time. I am not an author. I am not good at telling stories. I really need to preface, I'm not an author. I'm going to do my best. It's not going to be something like a Black Library book. It's going to be, I'm going to do my best. A lot of it is just going to be in the moment, me remembering details and just trying to knit it into a story. Obviously, I do have a list of different events in sequence, but a lot of it is just going to be, I'm going to be doing it live with no script. Secondly, each and every single character in my head has a voice. Now, I'm capable of fluctuating my voice fairly well. I've done it for quite a while now. There are going to be certain characters where I'm not going to be able to get their voices down right, and I think that's fairly understandable. For example, Cyratin Calamity Cyratin Calamity Magnolia. Her voice, I'm not going to be able to do. First of all, I'm not very good at doing feminine voices. Second of all, I am probably going to be horrific at trying to do what would be the right word for her voice? The sound of her voice, I guess sultry is kind of a good word, considering she's, a femme fatale and all that and stuff. But I'm going to do my best. Not only that, but I don't have the best of mics. I probably should upgrade the mic, but whatever. The reason I bring that part up is because it seems to cut off the highs and the lows of my voice. I learned this the hard way when I tried to sing into it, and it sounded so fucking monotone. So there is going to be that. Some of the voices might sound a little bit weird, largely because, again, the mic, I don't know if it's the mic or OBS, but something is cutting off the highs and the lows. Eventually, I'll probably do the Siege of Ostengrad version 2, where I have a new mic, and we're going to see if that's any better. But that's going to be way down the line, because I don't intend on buying a new mic anytime soon. So, yeah. I hope you guys are looking forward to that. This is going to be such a big fucking project. I hope you guys are looking forward to that. I also hope that you guys are looking forward to Saturday and Sunday's live streams at noon Central Standard Time, where we're doing RimWorld and Sunday Night Live, where I pick a random game and we game it out. And then right back here next Tuesday with the beginning of the Ruin War. So I hope you guys are looking forward to that. So until then, guys, see ya.